everybody, this is Stephen Wilson with The Social Grain. Uh, Today I've got the honor to speak with one of the most sincere, legitimately kind, but 100% real people on the planet. She's one of my wife's best friends. One of the first things I learned about her is that she's as big of, if not a little bit bigger of a Michael Jackson fan as I am, which is completely irrelevant to this conversation. But it just goes to show how fantastic she is. So that's why this would be a great conversation. From my understanding, she's been known to dabble in cooking and baking herself over the years, which would be a little bit more relevant to today's talk. But either way, we'll either spend the next 30 minutes talking about cuisine and her family's culture, or basking in the greatness of the greatest artist of all time. So we'll just have to see where the conversation takes us. Anyway, with that, welcome, Ursula. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much for having me, Stephen.
All right, so let me just get into it, and I'll start kind of from the beginning. Um, can you talk to me about your family's story, the history, any highlights within your family's journey?
Absolutely. Both of my parents were born and raised in Ghana, West Africa. And I should correct that in addition to being born in Ghana, my mother was raised in large part in England. She went to boarding school in England. And so a lot of my culture, in addition to having like a foundation in Ghanaian culture, I have the sprinkling of British things in my background. And of course, as a colonized country, we would have gotten some of that anyway, but we definitely got a hefty dose because my mother spent her formative years in England. And my father was educated in England before both of them came over here and settled in the DC metro area, initially in DC and then eventually in Maryland. And so we have been very blessed to be able to travel to London to keep up my mother's green card, the British equivalent of the green card at the time. So we used to travel to London regularly. And we also travel to Ghana very regularly. So have maybe not been fully immersed, but certainly very connected to my family and the pieces of the culture that come from both of those places, in addition to, of course, being, American girl born and bred.
That's right. That's right. So your family, you've got, how many siblings do you have?
I have two siblings,
Two
but both of
siblings.
my parents have lots of siblings.
Right.
Lots and lots. I have, we counted them out the other day. I have at least, I know I have more than 45 first cousins, but I haven't finished counting. So
Wait, how do you have 45 first cousins? Like,
my father has had seven siblings. Six
okay.
are still with us. And my mother had 16 siblings, 15 are still with us. So when you add it up, if everybody
Yes.
has an average of three
Yes.
kids,
There you
a lot
go.
of human beings for me to remember the faces of, Uh,
Right.
yeah, big old family. And
Big family, big family. So with that big family, we'll get into that in a little bit. I'm sure there's a lot of food that's involved with that, which we'll get into in a second. But first, thank you for sharing your family story. I think that's a tremendous journey. Between the Ghana influence and the British, like you said, the spending a lot of time in both, kind of immersed in both a little bit. But if we can kind of go fast forward a little bit in your lens, what actually got you into cooking or baking in general, or anything like that?
well, you can always ask Amira about it. What my reputation was in college, I went by the nickname Mama Urs because I like to take care of people. And I think that we can all agree that one of the easiest ways to take care of people is feeding them.
Yes.
And when we lived together in the Africana Center, or Cape Inn House, which was essentially the Black house on Tufts campus. And when we lived together, there was a kitchen on the first floor, and it really was a really incredible meeting spot for all kinds of different things. Like, people came to the Africana Center for many things, but informally, people came and cooked. Some days people were making empanadas when the Afro-Latinos were in the space. When Ghanaians and Nigerians were in the space, jollof and fried plantain were coming through. But
Oh,
I, being
man.
American-born West African, am weak on the African cuisine side of things. So how can I contribute? I can bake you a cookie.
There you
And
go.
so I had a basic cookie recipe that I used to always start with, but I went to a yard sale and I picked up like a Midwestern cookbook. Like on the back, was from somebody's neighborhood in Minnesota, I think, and just started baking whatever suggested I bake. I used to make what did they call it? Millionaire shortbread. Just this
Oh,
like thick layer of cookie,
yeah.
buttery cookie. And
Yeah.
then you just melted a bar of chocolate on top of that and spread it down.
Oh,
Like,
man. Sounds
really
fantastic.
very rich, very, oh, you had a bad day, I can fix that. Have some.
Right. There you go.
So that was very much my reputation. People would be down there doing all of their serious things, fighting for the cause, and I would kind of pop up with, have you considered a cookie? And, um, that's very much what people, the folks who didn't know me as well, that it's absolutely what they remember of me is, oh yeah, you're the one, you used to bake cookies, right? Sure
I
did.
mean, cookies help. Cookies can save the world.
They're putting a
There you
dent
go.
in the problem for sure.
Right. You get the right cookie. You get the right cookie, it'll help.
So that's definitely
So,
how it started. And I like food in general. So why not experiment with the
right.
different ways to make something that is so comforting to people, um, and share my
Yeah.
own self, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. So now to kind of tie it back together, what kind of influence has do you see in your cooking or maybe your baking um, that's come from either the different backgrounds, either the British influence, if there's any influence, or the Ghanaian or anything like that? Do you see in like you're cooking and you're like, oh yeah, I use this spice that we typically use in Ghana or anything like that?
I'll give you something pretty funny. Nutmeg is actually used by Ghanaians and British people alike. I don't know when West Africans were informed about nutmeg. Let me stop. Let me correct it. Nutmeg is absolutely indigenous to West Africa. That's where we heard of it.
There you
And
go. That's
but
right.
it's put in all sorts of things. People have nutmeg in jollof. People put nutmeg in we have in Nigerians call it chinchin, Ghanaians call it achamo. It's basically like a fried cookie that you've rolled a cookie dough and you cut it up into little chunks, just little like square things, and you deep fry them. And those are very much very nutmeggy, delicious little, pop them in your mouth, you eat them like it's a bag of chips, the type of thing you eat mindlessly, but it's definitely a taste of home for anybody from, British West Africa will talk to you about achamo, or chin chin is definitely the easier name to say. So Nigerians, you win round one. But nutmeg is a strong flavor in that. Every culture in the world has its form of donut. Again, Nigerians have the simple name of puff puff, and Ghanaians, we call the same thing buffrots. I don't entirely know why. The thought is that it's short for balls that float, so ball float, and then heavily accented buffrots.
Oh.
Yeah, it makes sense more or less. But again, you're making a donut. It's flavored with nutmeg, deep fried, lovely, soft, fluffy, hot and delicious thing to eat on your way to work in the morning. Walking around the streets of like downtown Accra, you can see like the ladies on the side of the road frying, and then the women who walk in between cars with all of the donuts on their heads selling you, and the people selling the chin chin or the achamo as well. Same thing in little baggies for people to snack on as they're on their way to work or on their way to whatever they're doing. But given that this is a conversation about bread, I wanted to bring up the fact that bread making is different in West Africa.
Okay. How's
Um,
that?
when we're thinking about the process, and I've been thinking lately, I got a stand mixer when I graduated from my program recently. And so I've been thinking more about baking and really the chemistry of it. because we all know that it's a little bit complicated, and that's why so many people's breads and souffles fall flat. Like it's more
Right.
complicated than mixing it up and hoping for the best.
That's accurate.
And because of the heat in West Africa, breads don't rise in the same way. So you have to do things slightly differently. And I haven't figured it out yet, but there is a bread, it's called like Ghana bread. And it's just a sweet bread that people use like for sandwiches and for toast in the morning or at night. Um, and I've, looked up on the internet how to make it. And people are like, yeah, you can't really make it in America because it's not
Mm,
hot enough.
wow.
Right. And so, I mean, even baking cookies in Ghana is different because your butter, which in America, oh, bring to room temperature, it might just melt. And melted butter creates a different cookie than room temperature butter does, than cold butter does.
Right.
Microwaved butter versus stovetop heated browned butter creates a
Mm.
different cookie. And in that same vein, you create a different bread. And so, which is why Ghana bread is very irreplaceable and very much the sort of thing that all of us, foreign transplants wait very patiently to go home and eat.
Wow. So you really only truly get Ghana bread when you're back home.
Just about, there's one company, Effie's, that has a Ghana bread brand here. You can go to any African market,
Okay.
definitely in the DC area, and
Yeah.
maybe, I don't know if I'll find it out here. I'm on the West Coast now, and
Yeah.
it's hard out here. But
Probably not.
there's one brand that does it, as opposed to like all of the other African things. Trader Joe's now has a jollof recipe, but
Really?
nobody else is doing, yeah, but nobody else is doing Ghana bread yet because it requires a little bit more thought because of kind of the chemistry of the thing.
Wow. So what can you describe that the Ghana bread? Like is it I guess what makes it
What
Ghana
makes it?
bread? Like
That's the thing, is that I don't quite know. Think about a brioche
yeah, yeah.
and think about how eggy and delicious a brioche is,
Okay.
right? But that's the thing about a brioche, is that it's very eggy. Many
Yeah.
egg yolks go into a brioche, and that's why brioche has the texture that it does. Ghana bread has a similar texture on the inside of the bread, but the crust is a lot softer.
Oh,
So it's not as like browned and eggy as a brioche is. It's a little bit softer, a little bit more buttery or more margarine heavy, if that
okay.
makes any sense. And the folks on the internet that I've like seen who've tried to make Ghana bread in America usually make it in a bread maker. Like it has to be made in a bread maker in order to like manipulate the humidity and the
Right.
conditions that you need to kind of imitate the coast of West Africa, I suppose.
Mm,
So it's a very soft roll on the outside, but it's not such a dark crust or such an eggy crust as like a Hawaiian roll, a King's Hawaiian roll, or as a brioche, if
okay.
that makes sense.
Okay.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. That makes perfect sense. Wow.
mhm.
So I guess along those same lines, what what other types of cuisine was in your house? I know we mentioned, with the large family, obviously, when with gatherings, food is always the center most of the time with large family gatherings. And even inside of, your immediate family's home. Can you talk about what kind of cuisine growing up do you recall, and what was some of the staples within that mealtime?
Well, um, not to be cliche or anything, but as I said before, West African children, we ate a lot of jollof growing up.
Yeah,
Jollof being rice that's cooked in a spiced tomato sauce, essentially.
right.
And so jollof was absolutely a staple of childhood. And it was the perfect way to sneak a couple of vegetables in for the kids, because you go in a bag of mixed vegetables and oh, now you've gotten your green beans and your peas for the day. In addition to things like jollof, other Ghanaian foods that were a significant part of my life are gari, which is dried ground cassava. Again, all the West African kids know.
Okay.
Um, it's a grain, so you are eating it with whatever meat and whatever stew or whatever pepper. And so when I say pepper, I'm talking kind of about the West African concept of a pepper sauce, which is very similar to if you've ever been to a Chinese restaurant and they offer you like a chili oil.
Okay.
And it's like red peppers, among other things, in like a red or oil. And you can, dip your spring roll, throw it on top of your rice. West Africans, and especially Ghanaians, have a very similar concept. We have one that has a name that sounds a bit rude, but it's not. It's called Shitor, spelled Shitor. And it's basically a cooked pepper sauce where you have dried fish and dried shrimp, along with like Scotch bonnet peppers and onions and ginger and garlic blended up and cooked until it looks like black. And really, like, people who aren't used to it would probably be a little bit taken aback, like, why am I eating this black stuff on the side of my plate? But you take, your gari, you dip it in there, you pick up a little bit of fried fish, and then you pop it in your mouth, and you're just happy to be here. In addition to like black shita, there's also like red or fresh red pepper sauce, which is, you're blending tomatoes, again, Scotch bonnet or whatever type of pepper you have, habaneros, onions, garlic, and you're blending that up. And, again, you have like a pepper sauce, kind of the same way that you would use ketchup, and you can put it on anything as a condiment.
Yeah.
So those are kind of the things that come to my mind.
Okay. So something that you mentioned that I do want to just point out, that I don't know that a lot of the general audience thinks about. But something that you mentioned is the Scotch bonnet peppers and the just peppers in general.
Mhm.
Um, and you hear a lot of that in the cuisine in the islands too, like in the Caribbean. That's
Sure.
not by accident. Like there's a very clear relationship, right, with the cuisine that comes from West Africa versus the islands. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, that's it's very, very clear.
There's a really powerful history, and there are many folks kind of trying to address the history of how foods got here and
Mhm.
how, the African diaspora maintains its cuisine wherever it goes. Um, Africans that were enslaved and brought over, brought yams with them, which is why
Yes,
Jamaicans still hold on to the yam.
right.
Africans that were enslaved and brought over kept the seeds of the Scotch bonnets, of the okra, as it's pronounced
Okra.
in
Yes.
Ghana, we say okra. Apparently, tucked it in with beads into cornrows, and that's how it made it all the way over here. And so
Wow.
these are things that absolutely made the transatlantic passage, and are very much maintained today. Every single culture that has brushed past Blackness has a rice dish. What is it? Arroz con gandules, the Puerto Rican like rice and peas, essentially,
Mhm.
and the Jamaican rice and peas,
Yeah,
and Louisiana rice and peas, and jollof rice. It's all the same concept.
it is.
We're doing it again and again and again because memory the memory is really long,
Wow.
despite everything that folks have tried to do.
When you think about it like that is it's a testament, right,
Yes,
to strength, to the power of food in general. Um, like it's lasted through so much. Like if you think about our ancestors and things, I know we're getting deep into it now, but if you think about the ancestors, like the one thing that they had to hold on to was food, right? Like you said, they were tucking seeds in the cornrows. Like it's insane. Like that's the one thing, and not only did they hold on to it, but they grew. Like it grew. Like you see influence of it today in America, in the islands, like we mentioned, and like you said, the rice dishes. Like that's like I said, that stuff's not by accident. Like that's very real, very real. So that's a good little history lesson for the audience today. So let's get kind of get back into your family's history. Um, you mentioned all the different cuisines and the different pepper sauces and the jollof and things like that. Do you have a favorite of anything growing up that you still either like you really miss or you try to get or what do you think? What do you think there?
One of my very favorite foods in the whole wide world is called tatale and ababoy. And
Okay.
tatale is um, ripe fried plantain that has been mashed into a pancake and fried. So you take extremely ripe plantain, like it almost looks like it's rotten, the whole thing's black. Take it out of there, you mush it up. Maybe you add a little bit. No, I don't think you have to add anything to it. You just mush it up, add the spices. So again, there's going to be blended onion, blended garlic, scotch bonnet, a little bit
Mhm.
of salt, and you flatten it out into a pancake and you fry that. While you're doing that, you're stewing ababoy, which is a type of garbanzo bean. And so you're stewing the garbanzo bean, you're keeping the garbanzo bean in a little bit of the sauce that like kind of comes off of beans, that like slightly thickened water, essentially. And again, that's also being seasoned and spiced and it's hot. And so you have your fried plantain, you have your garbanzo beans, you add a little bit of sugar to the garbanzo beans and you eat them together. And it's one of the examples of like unintentionally vegan foods. You know, people think about, oh, I'm going to go to Africa, and you go, when you get there, they're not going to understand you when you say that you don't eat meat. They'll go, oh, don't worry, here's some chicken, and you'll go,
Right.
okay. But if you know to ask for something like tatale and ababoy, it's automatically vegan. You don't even have to fight. So
Wow.
it's one of my very favorite foods. Everybody knows that when I arrive in Ghana, somebody has bought me at least a pack and it's been brought to my house. And that's another
Yeah.
funny thing about tatale and ababoy is it's not the sort of thing that people make in their own houses. Generally, again, there's a memory and there are families and that's the family that does tatale and ababoy. So you go out and you find the seller, like who sells tatale and ababoy because this family has always made tatale and ababoy. Like it's not the sort of thing that I know how to cook. It's not the sort of thing anybody in my family knows how to cook, but we know where to get it.
Oh wow. So it's not even like a commonly prepared dish. Like you gotta know the right people.
Commonly eaten, very
Commonly,
commonly,
yeah.
but you have to know where to go get it.
Right, right. Man, that must be good then. It's very um special, I guess. Very special in that you gotta get it from the right place.
You really do.
Good, good. Um so going back into um the sense of bread. You mentioned the kind of bread and things like that. Um and something that you mentioned is interesting is that, a lot of families don't make that specific dish that you were talking about. Do you know of a lot of families and I know you mentioned like the Ghana bread specifically, probably not unless they're in Ghana, but is it very common for families to make bread like in the Ghanaian culture or anything?
I'd say no. In
Yeah,
general, we don't bake like that
right.
because thinking again about colonialism, wheat was not a major food group. We're going back to the things like gari, so ground
Hmm.
cassava to yams. Um, we eat a lot of cornmeal, fermented cornmeal is called kinke. Um, we also have another type of cornmeal dish called banku. And of course, again, Nigerians coming in with the 1-2 fufu, which could be made from many different things. It could be cassava-based fufu, it could be potato-based fufu, it can be yam-based fufu, it can be plantain-based fufu.
Right,
So those were like the staple grains as opposed to a wheat grain
right,
that one would traditionally make bread with.
right,
So generally, um, when people are making things like there's been of course a shift because we were first colonized by the Portuguese in the 1400s, and so things have been coming in of course for about 600 years, but still within that it wasn't originally, it's like not it's not ancient history in
right. Yeah.
what used to be the Gold Coast of West Africa. So people don't bake that much bread. Interestingly, one of the flour-based things that people are most likely to make in their home is actually pancakes.
Oh, really?
We do a version of crepe like a
Okay.
French crepe. I'm sorry, I took French in high school, so I can't say crepe. I can almost
Yeah,
hear
I'm like crepe.
my
Yeah,
French
yeah, crepe.
teacher like hissing at me from around the corner somewhere, but a crepe. And again, because it's Ghana, and as I already said, what do we love? Nutmeg. Where do we want it? In the crepes. So
Everywhere.
we have what we call a Ghana pancake that's very much a crepe base, but plus
Yeah,
that little bit of nutmeg, plus a little bit of extra sugar, so that we're not adding anything onto it. Like you don't need Nutella, you don't need anything. It's
yeah.
beautiful by itself. And I would say that that's probably the most common flour-based thing I see people making in their houses.
Okay.
Uh, yeah.
So really then anything baked, not necessarily sweet, because you still get sweet, right? I know nutmeg has a little bit of sweetness to it, but anything baked is really a treat. Like it's not very often that you'll see folks that are regularly baking then in their
Say
homes.
so,
Would you
because
say that?
again, think about it's 90 degrees. You want the oven on in your house to 350 just to add to that. Like,
That's a good point.
add a little
That's a,
flavor to
that's a
your
very
afternoon.
good point. Yes.
So generally, it's a profession. People who bake, like that's what they do.
Right.
For parties, like when you bake, it's an event. For parties, people have meat pies.
Yeah.
Again, every culture has their meat pie,
Yes.
empanada, and I don't know, can't think of anybody else's meat pie name at the moment, but there are many. And we have meat pies. Well, British people just do, I don't know, meat in a pie. They love meat in
Right.
a pie. Basically, the cornerstone of their whole cuisine is, do you have meat? Do you have some flour? You want to put them together? Or
Good.
boiled potato? That's crazy.
That's right.
So, um, yeah, meat pies. If you're having a party, if you're having a wedding, if you're having a funeral, there will be meat pies because it's easy, it's compact, people can walk and eat them at the same time. Same thing with the bread. The same way I told you the ladies have like the donuts and the cookies on their head, the
Mhm.
fried cookies on their head. There's also a lady who has all these this bread on her head, and she has a big thing of margarine sitting in the middle. And so she's just walking on the street, and you say, "Bread, lady, come here." And she walk on over to you, grab a thing of bread, stick the knife that she has stuck in the margarine, spread it on there, hand it to you.
Good to go.
Good to go.
Man. That's
So yeah,
efficiency right there. You get
it's
the bread
it
and the
is a bit of
butter.
a treat to
Yeah.
get something big, because somebody else has sacrificed their comfort in their house for you.
Yes. Yes. That makes perfect sense. I think that it all ties together, right? The heat. You don't want to be adding on to the heat.
Um,
Uh, good. So last question I do have, and this is kind of, I mean, it can be deep, personal, anything like that, as deep as you want to get. What's a fond memory that comes to mind when you think of not just bread? So I know the conversation. I try to lean towards bread, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that. But just bread, food, anything in general, from growing up that you have that's very closely tied to that food and your culture in general.
Absolutely. Um, I'll talk about my great aunt who passed away this year. Um, when I mentioned before that when I arrive in the country, somebody's always ready with my favorite dish, tatale and ababoy. She was one of the people on that list who
Yeah.
had it ready to go. She knew my flight was coming in. She'd already purchased it. It was going to be on the dining room at the house I was staying at, Toot Sweet.
Yes.
And something else that she used to do for me was get me what's called nkate cake.
Hmm.
And nkate being ground nut, which is a peanut, and cake being obviously a cake. And so it's essentially peanut brittle. It's the Ghanaian version of peanut brittle. And the church that I grew up in Ghana, Ridge Church, Accra, there was a woman who knew her audience and knew who her customers were. And after church, she perched right there at the end of the car park, knowing that it was going to take a while for everybody to filter out. And she would sell coconut cakes and these peanut cakes or nkate cake. And my great aunt knew how much I loved those since I was a little girl. And every time she went to church, she would buy them for me. And they would always be ready, waiting in her house. So when I came over to visit her, I could eat them. And even if I didn't get to go to Ghana one year because I was stuck here for school, she would send them back with my father or with my mother so that I could have them all the way over here.
Wow.
So that's a very fond memory I have. And I've been reflecting on that lately as I miss her
Yes.
very much.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I know that's very personal, but I definitely appreciate you sharing that. Well, thank you, Ursula, for just opening up, kind of showing the world watching and listening, your a little bit of your culture, your family's history, your family, your large family, even going into a little history lesson for a little bit. I definitely appreciate the time. I got a lot out of this. I'm hopeful that everybody that's listening got a lot out of this. So again, thank you for joining me today.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me, Stephen.
Absolutely. So thank you everybody else watching and listening. And we will talk to everybody later. Thanks, guys.